Over the Sinai Peninsula in the fall of 1973, an Egyptian pilot locked onto a jet just ahead. The profile was unmistakable. French-built, delta-shaped, identical to the Mirage he flew. But something was off. The other aircraft moved faster, climbed sharper, and turned tighter than any Mirage he'd ever flown. Then he spotted it, a bold orange triangle outlined in black. No Arab Mirage carried markings like that. Caught between firing and breaking away, he hesitated only for a second before he retightened his grip on the stick. That moment of doubt was all it took for the mystery jet to pull straight into a vertical climb, roll inverted, and drop behind him in one continuous fluid motion. Now, the hunter became the target. It didn't make sense. France had cut Israel off years ago. These planes weren't supposed to exist. So what exactly was he fighting? And how did Israel build it? In the years following Israel's independence, only a handful of nations were willing to supply the young state with modern mid-century weapons. Facing hostility from its neighbors and an arms embargo from Britain, in the 1950s, Israel turned to France. Soon, what began as cautious arms deals blossomed into a full-blown military partnership, where Israel's military received aircraft, tanks, artillery, blueprints, and crucial technical details, with pilots traveling all the way to the French facilities to train. The relationship hit its stride during the 1956 Suez Crisis, when Egypt's forceful nationalization of the canal prompted a coordinated military response, where Israeli paratroopers pushed into the Sinai Peninsula, while British and French forces bombed Egyptian airfields and landed troops near Port Said to seize control of the area. Within just a decade, French equipment was the core of Israel's armed forces. But of all their joint ventures, none would matter more than the Dassault Mirage 3C. Built for high-speed interception, the Delta-winged fighter was France's first supersonic jet fighter, capable of exceeding Mach 2, operating at altitudes above 55,000 feet, where most enemies couldn't follow. After the first delivery of Mirages in 1962, Israel fielded nearly 70 aircraft across multiple squadrons. These fighters were armed with twin 30mm DEFA 552 cannons and a mix of Matra R530 and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. Yet for all its strengths, the Mirage 3C wasn't designed for long-range strike missions. To fill that gap, Israel and French officials began working on a new variant, the Mirage 5. Stripped of complex avionics, fitted with an extended nose for extra fuel, and tailored to carry heavier bomb loads, this model, designed for clear weather attacks deep into enemy territory, was exactly what Israel needed. In 1966, the two nations inked an ambitious deal for 50 Mirage 5s at roughly $200 million, with delivery set for 1968. But before this new strike force could enter the Israeli Air Force, events outside the cockpit would soon send the entire program spinning off course. While the Mirage 5 was still being assembled, and with its delivery only months away, by the late 1960s, France was pursuing a very different agenda. A decade prior, with France deep in economic troubles and a colonial war spiraling out of control in Algeria, Charles de Gaulle, once the leader of the Free French during World War II, returned to power. Using the crisis to overhaul the system entirely, he rewrote the Constitution and created a new presidency from scratch. As the first head of the newly established Fifth Republic, de Gaulle moved quickly to reclaim a more independent foreign policy, aiming to reduce the country's reliance on NATO. He then shifted focus toward strengthening ties with the Arab world to fit their long-standing interests across the region, including Algeria, Lebanon, and former protectorates like Tunisia and Morocco, as well as closer relationships with Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. Though this decision gave him both access to oil and a way to expand French influence outside of the United States-led sphere, it also caused de Gaulle to, over time, view Israel as a source of regional instability. At the same time, around the late 1950s and early 1960s, Soviet cargo ships poured into Syria and Egypt, unloading crates of MiG-21s, T-55 tanks, and SA-2 missile systems. Through this growing stream of Kremlin-backed aid, the Arab armies were becoming more modern, and most importantly, more capable. As MiGs filled Arab airfields and troops massed on every border, and incidents on all fronts began to multiply all throughout 1966 and early 1967, Israeli commanders began weighing their options to prepare for the seemingly inevitable conflict. By late May, the The crisis was spiraling out of control. As Jordan and Syria mobilized their armies, Egypt's President Nasser expelled UN peacekeepers from the Sinai, moved 100,000 troops to Israel's border, and blockaded the nearby straits of Tiran, cutting off Israel's access to the Red Sea. On June 3, 1967, with the inevitability of war, de Gaulle made his move and chose his side by imposing a sweeping arms embargo on the region. The restrictions landed hardest on Israel, halting the delivery of the Mirage 5s and other vital equipment, with de Gaulle bluntly stating, quote, "France will not be the first to open fire in the Levant." But Israel would. Only 2 days after the embargo took effect, on June 5, 1967, Israel launched Operation Focus. From the horizon, wave after wave of aircraft, skimming just 60 feet above the Mediterranean to avoid radar detection, appeared all over Egyptian air bases across the nation. Then, in a series of precisely timed strikes, these Israeli Mirage and Mystère fighters closed in to attack, catching most on the ground during shift changes. In the chaos, the Egyptian pilots scrambled to their MiGs and found only burning wreckage. After obliterating a whopping 450 enemy aircraft in the opening hours, by noon, Israel had achieved total air superiority, allowing ground forces to advance unchallenged. In what came to be known as the Six-Day War, Israeli forces had captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, tripling the country's size while losing only 46 aircraft to enemy action. The lightning victory completely validating Israel's air power. Then came the consequences. Though the June 1967 embargo was initially framed as a temporary measure, relations between Israel and France continued to deteriorate, all while the Mirage 5 aircraft remained locked in Dassault's Bordeaux facility. The breaking point came in December 1968, when Israeli commandos struck Beirut International Airport, destroying 13 civilian aircraft in retaliation for previous attacks. From there, Paris responded by making the arms embargo permanent and Israel-specific, cutting off not just the new aircraft that were set to replace the lost ones in battle, but also maintenance support and spare parts for the existing Mirage 3C fleet, making each sortie riskier without proper maintenance support and replacement parts. Now, with the former ally gone, a dangerous gap in their air defenses, and enemies already rearming for the next round, Israel was left with one option: build the aircraft themselves, using whatever means necessary. Right before the official embargo was approved, a small group of Israeli test pilots remained in France, flying Mirage 5s as part of pre-delivery trials. But now, they were flying jets they had paid for, but would never take home. Upon requesting permission to relocate the aircraft to Corsica for winter training, French intelligence grew suspicious, especially when there was a follow-up request for long-range fuel tanks. According to documents, following the embargo, France impounded all the aircraft, which were then taken over by the French Air Force as Mirage 5Fs. Israel, unwilling to accept the loss of fighter jets it had already paid for, began exploring every possible avenue to obtain the plans for the French Mirage and reproduce the aircraft themselves. The official story maintains it was reverse-engineered, but depending on who tells the story, other accounts range from secret shipments to industrial loopholes to outright espionage. Some insist Mossad agents infiltrated Dassault's facilities, photographing documents in darkened offices. Others whisper that Marcel Dassault himself, remembering his own wartime persecution, quietly slipped plans to Israeli contacts over dinner in Paris. There are rumors that Israel Aircraft Industries partnered with the American firm North American Rockwell under a manufacturing license reportedly issued in January 1968, though the exact nature of this cooperation remains unclear. The most audacious theory is that 50 complete Mirage 5s were secretly shipped to Israel, disassembled and stripped of weapons, electronics, ejection seats, and engines, directly from the factory. These aircraft, sometimes labeled as agricultural equipment, allegedly made their way to Israel in crates, while French officials deliberately looked the other way. Whether partial or complete, such transfers would have allowed Israel to finalize the aircraft on its own soil, bypassing the ban without ever taking delivery in the official record. But one piece of the puzzle is beyond dispute. At the time, Israel was also urgently seeking a way to produce the Atar 09C engine, which they already operated but could no longer legally obtain from France. His search led them to Sulzer AG, a Swiss firm licensed to manufacture the Atar for Switzerland's own Mirage fleet. In the fall of 1968, a Sulzer engineer named Alfred Frauenknecht met with a team of Israeli handlers in a warehouse outside Bern. In exchange for $200,000 in cash, Frauenknecht handed over 20 crates that night, loaded onto waiting trucks. Inside were manufacturing blueprints, tooling instructions, and production sequences, everything needed to reproduce the Atar 09C engine from scratch. Officially, his leak was limited to engine data, but speculations persisted for decades that those crates contained far more than engine blueprints. Some believe Frauenknecht provided complete airframe plans for the Mirage 5 itself. Whatever the truth may be, what remains certain is that within months, Israel began producing its own version of the Mirage. By early 1969, strange activity began in Israel aircraft industries, with workers arriving in the early morning hours at facilities near Ben Gurion Airport. Construction of the new aircraft proceeded in the utmost secrecy within the airport's secured perimeter, as engineers adapted foreign designs to domestic capabilities. After months of intensive work, in September 1969, the first prototype lifted off the runway for its maiden flight, marking the birth of Israel's first domestically produced fighter, the Nisher, or Griffin Vulture. In 1971, the first production Nisher aircraft was formally handed over to the Israeli Air Force. To observers familiar with French aviation, its profile bore an uncanny resemblance to the very aircraft France had refused to deliver. The model retained the delta wing configuration, engine, and aerodynamic profile of its French predecessor, yet incorporated significant Israeli modifications. Engineers had replaced French ejection seats with British Martin Baker Mark IV models, and integrated Israeli-developed avionics tailored to regional navigation and communications requirements. Armed with two 30mm Defa 5.52 cannons and fitted with 5 hardpoints, the aircraft could carry various weapons, including Shafrir 2 infrared-guided air-to-air missiles, unguided bombs, rocket pods, and external fuel tanks. Though lacking radar-guided missile capability, the Nisher offered impressive performance. Its high speed, strong climb rate, and responsive handling created an effective combat platform built entirely outside traditional Western arms channels. Here was a fighter that existed because conventional procurement had failed. Following the delivery of the first model, production accelerated to meet operational demands. The Israeli Air Force quickly integrated the new aircraft into its combat squadrons, where pilots adapted to its characteristics and capabilities. The Nisher's combat debut came on January 8, 1973, when Israeli pilots engaged and shot down a pair of Syrian MiG-21s during an escort mission. Yet questions lingered about what exactly had been built and how closely it matched the original Mirage 5. Soon, these questions would be answered, not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in actual combat. On October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched simultaneous offensives across the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. This coordinated surprise ambush was timed deliberately to begin on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, catching Israeli forces completely off balance and leading to rapid Arab gains in the opening hours. As the Yom Kippur War erupted all around the territory, the Israeli Air Force, stretched thin and forced into rapid response, had no choice but to scramble every available combat aircraft, including the around 40 Nishers in active service. That were originally designed for ground attack, they were thrown into air-to-air combat, often facing MiG-21s and Su-7s in contested skies. For nearly 3 weeks, the Nishers carried out both air superiority and strike missions, matching and in some cases exceeding the performance of the original Mirage 3C, offering greater range, heavier payloads, and faster turnaround times between sorties, making them especially effective in the high-tempo environment of the Yom Kippur War. Altogether, Nisher pilots were credited with up to 100 enemy aircraft destroyed during the conflict, while total losses tallied only 15. Fighting over the Sinai Desert and near the Syrian capital of Damascus came with more than just missiles and maneuvers. In the middle of the dogfights, Israeli pilots faced new danger. Some of the aircraft they were chasing looked exactly like their own. Years before, Egypt and Libya had also bought Mirage variants from France. Now, with jets flying on both sides of the line, hesitation could be fatal. To prevent friendly fire, Israeli ground crews painted large orange triangles outlined in black on the noses and wings of every Nishair and Mirage. Following a UN-brokered ceasefire, though the Yom Kippur War exposed flaws in Israel's early warning system, it proved to the entire world that the Israel aircraft industry's Nishair was more than up to the task during one of the Israeli Air Force's toughest challenges. Back in Paris, officials were well aware of what Israel had accomplished, but the French government chose not to intervene. Dassault Aviation stayed silent, quietly redesignating the once Israeli Mirage 5s as Mirage 5Fs and absorbing them into French service. Some later speculated that Marcel Dassault, a Jewish survivor of wartime deportation, may have sympathized with Israel's position, or simply saw no reason to stand in the way. As the IAI Nishair became more well-known all over the world, Alfred Frauenknecht's involvement did not remain secret for long. 3 years after his clandestine deal, he was arrested and charged by Swiss authorities with illegally exporting military technology. During his trial in Zurich, prosecutors revealed that he had sold not only engine blueprints, but also detailed production instructions. He was convicted in 1971 and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, becoming one of the few individuals actually punished in the massive web of covert efforts surrounding the birth of the aircraft. While the scientist never denied the sale, he insisted he acted out of ideological sympathy for Israel, not personal gain. The court saw otherwise, and the scientist served 2 years before receiving early release. But by then, Israel's new fighter was already flying all over the region. In total, Israeli industry produced 51 single-seat Nishairs and 10 two-seat variations for training before production ended in 1974. Though the type remained in frontline service for several more years, it was gradually phased out by newer aircraft. But the Nishair's story was just beginning. In 1978, facing regional tensions and looking to modernize its air force, Argentina finalized a deal to purchase 39 surplus Nishairs from Israel. Arriving at the Tandil Air Base later that year, the aircraft was redesignated as the IAI Dagger. In addition to refurbishments, new modifications were included, such as locally integrated avionics, navigation systems suited to South Atlantic operations, and compatibility with French-supplied Matra Magic air-to-air missiles. 4 years later, these aircraft would face their most demanding combat test. In April 1982, following Argentina's invasion of the Falkland Islands, the Dagger pilots operating from mainland bases at the very edge of their range now faced a daunting mission profile: low-level, long-distance strikes across open sea, often without the benefit of aerial refueling. Navigating by stopwatch and visual references only, and relying on ground-based controllers and precise coordination, the Daggers would streak toward the British fleet at wave-top height. At the last moment, the models would suddenly pull up, release their 500-pound bombs or cluster munitions in a single pass, then slam the throttles forward and dive for the deck, racing away before the defenders even had a chance to react. In one of their earliest strikes, Daggers from Group 06 attacked the Type 21 frigates HMS Arrow and HMS Alacrity near Falkland Sound. Both ships escaped with only minor damage, but the attack made one thing clear: Argentine pilots were prepared to push straight through the Royal Navy's front line. In the following weeks, Daggers participated in repeated sorties against British vessels. On May 21st, during the British landings at the San Carlos Water, multiple waves of Daggers and A-4 Skyhawks broke through the air defenses, inflicting damage on HMS Ardent, HMS Antrim, and HMS Broadsword. But the price was steep. Flying without radar or modern countermeasures, nearly a dozen Daggers were downed by Sea Harrier fighters armed with AIM-9L Sidewinders and missile-equipped warships. The low-level attacks by the Israeli Air Force forced the once mighty Royal Navy to adapt. Continuous combat air patrol flights by Sea Harriers became essential to protect the fleet. By the time the war ended on June 14, 1982, the surviving Daggers returned to mainland bases, outmatched in some areas by the Sea Harriers, but once again proving to be an effective asset in fast, high-risk strike roles. The campaign later pushed Argentina to upgrade its surviving Daggers to a locally developed modernization that added updated avionics, radar warning systems, and compatibility with newer weapons. The Daggers remained in service until the early 2000s, before being fully retired, after well over 2 decades of operational use. By then, Israel had already moved on to something faster, tougher, and entirely its own. Building on the experience gained from the Nishair, Israeli engineers soon began work on a more advanced fighter that would overcome the limitations of the original Mirage design. This new aircraft would become the IAI Kafir, a true multi-role platform capable of both air superiority and ground attack in a variety of weather conditions. A key change was the replacement of the French Attar turbojet with a more powerful American engine, a license-built version of the General Electric J79 that provided a major performance boost with 11,900 pounds of dry thrust and up to 17,900 pounds with afterburner. To match this increased power, the airframe was strengthened and aerodynamic refinements were introduced, including the addition of small canard foreplanes ahead of the wings to improve maneuverability and control. The Kafir also received an entirely new suite of Israeli-developed avionics and a varied armament option range of two Rafale-produced 30mm DEFA 553 cannons providing close-range firepower, while the aircraft's external pylons could carry a wide selection of weapons, including AIM-9 Sidewinder and Shafrir air-to-air missiles, AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles, Shrike anti-radiation missiles, and a variety of general-purpose and precision-guided bombs. Production began in 1975, with a total of 220 models of different variants incorporating improved avionics and weapon systems. Yet, though capable, Kafir's frontline career soon faced competition from American fighters arriving through expanding United States-Israeli agreements like the F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons, both offering superior radar, range, and compatibility with American-made weapons. By the early 1980s, Kafirs were relegated to strike and training duties as American jets took over primary combat roles, and by the following decades, they were rendered completely obsolete. Despite this quick phasing out, the IAI offered upgraded variants to foreign buyers at a fraction of the cost of new Western fighters. Colombia became one of the Kafir's largest operators, acquiring a fleet of Kafir variants beginning in the late 1980s and continuing into the 2000s, with Colombia investing in avionics upgrades to keep them operational into the modern era. Meanwhile, after acquiring a number of aircraft in the 1980s, Ecuador acquired Kafirs, which played a prominent role in one of the last conventional air-to-air combat environments in South America during the 1995 Sinai War with Peru, where the type conducted patrols and ground attack missions. Today, though all combat fighters in Israeli service are American-built, the Israeli-made Kafir continues to serve in countries like Colombia and Sri Lanka, and even flies mock combat missions for the U.S. military. From an embargo that shook the Israeli army to its core, to a secretive construction process the world has yet to fully understand, to combat over the Sinai in the South Atlantic, the IAI Nasher and its successor, the Kafir, proved that when the world closed its doors, Israel built its own runway.